Hey guys, welcome back to Seller Sessions, another special edition on Facebook Live. Today I brought in with me Angie Chacon, Steve Simonson and Kian Gilzari.
That's right.
So today what we're going to be talking about is how you're going to be able to source like a boss, source like these experts here. So just to give you a little bit of background on each one of them. Steve I've known for quite a while now, maybe 2 or 3 years now. And this guy works on next level. I mean, I've spoken to him where he's doing containers like 150 in Q4. I don't know if that's a month or week. I've just completely lost count. But the point is he's doing it at tremendous scale. So should be able to give you a lot of feedback here. And he's very insightful. He's been doing this a very, very long time. So I'm looking forward to pressing him on a few issues and questions and stuff here to help the audience. Angie, the difference with Angie, she didn't just go out sourcing, she owns the damn factory. So, I mean, you can't really get much bigger than that rather than just sourcing products, is actually owning the factory. That's a proper boss. So we'll get some insights there because we can have a look at both ends of the scale. And then you've got Kian. I mean, Kian, is that a top that you've produced? Because, I mean, you do the Olympics, Bed Bath and Beyond. Who else is there? You do Neymar, is it that right? The Barcelona striker.
Yeah. Neymar, well, he's with PSG right now, but he might be headed back to Barcelona.
Oh, he might be heading back. See, I can't even keep up with that. So what I'm trying to say, guys, today we've got a fantastic lineup. That's my rundown and rendition of the guys here. Steve, I'll hand over to you. Do you want to give a bit of a bit more background on yourself, and then we'll move to Angie and then on to Kian?
Briefly, thanks for that generous introduction. I have sourced for a long time. I've been around a long time. That makes me the elder of the bunch, I suppose. But the reality is, we ship containers. We probably average, 25 to 35 containers a week at this stage. And in peak times, it goes a little higher. And if we're trying to beat a tariff, it goes even higher still. So I would just say that if you want to understand global trade, if you want to understand the China tariffs, I have some opinions about that. Happy to share them.
Sounds good. And Angie?
Well, I guess you could say I started sourcing products from other people when I started, especially selling on Amazon. And I got to a point where I was expanding too fast. I was having difficulties with my suppliers. And I suppose you could say that kind of led to me wanting just to create my own manufacturing company and have full control over my own product, my quality. I'm also in the skincare niche, so it's sort of more important for me, quality and control over ingredients and things like that. And that kind of led me into my journey into manufacturing myself. And then, now I manufacture for many others, but that was kind of how I all got started.
Sounds good. And Kian?
Yeah, thanks, Danny, for the kind introduction. Yeah, I've been living and working in China for the past 10 years. I lived in China for 2 years in Shanghai. I set up an office there, and I just really based myself out there because in that time I've sort of developed over 2,500 products, and I was constantly going back and forth to China. So I thought, why not just base myself here? I can get access to a lot more factories, build better relationships. So I've really sort of built my businesses off of Amazon, and just sort of traditionally was in the B2B, like business to business space, like selling to other retailers, and then sort of transitioned into Amazon a few years ago. So I've kind of got a wide variety of experience with like sort of retailers, department stores, brands, people that I've supplied, as well as doing my own brands as well. So happy to help out in any way I can.
Sounds good. Well, let's get into the nuts and bolts. There's a lot of stuff in the news at the moment, especially in and around what's going on with the tariffs and with Trump. Steve, can I get your opinion first? What's been unfolding in the last couple of weeks?
Well, the first observation I have is that it's extraordinarily fluid. It's changing like crazy. And, the fact that we now have to watch Twitter to figure out what the next foreign policy move is nuts to me, but that's the way it is. So last week, Trump announced the 10% on the remaining 300 billion of goods, which is not ideal, but it is what it is. And China retaliated with some currency moves and also a pledge basically to not buy U.S. agriculture. So this is the same tit for tat battle, but it's escalating. It's getting far worse than I expected it to be. A year ago, I didn't expect it to amount to much. So it's moving quickly. There's a lot of changes. And I have to tell you, I see Facebook, people trying to help each other on Facebook, and massive disinformation, massive mistakes being made. It's really important that people understand what's really happening with their product So talking to their freight forwarder and getting true information about their specifics really matters, especially if they're going from China to the United States. It's really changing rapidly.
Makes sense. And Kian, what's your take?
Yeah, and exactly. Just to sort of elaborate on what Steve was saying, China, I mean, there's a lot of news about it yesterday. They devalued their currency to the lowest it's ever been in over a decade. And now like $1 is about 7.1 or 7.07 RMB. And consider that compared to May last year, $1 was 6.25 RMB. So it's devalued more than 10%. So what that really means for like Amazon sellers is that your supplier is gaining 10% more without actually doing any more work. So how to sort of play that in your favor is...
Hold on to that thought, because I'm going to ask you about that a bit later, about some tactics on that.
Yeah. Yes. So basically what Steve was saying, it's constantly changing. Like things are happening in the news and you really just have to be informed by the best sources and don't go to sort of Facebook for your information. Kind of ask the experts, ask your forwarders and things like that, and really try and figure out the best way to sort of play it into your own advantage.
Yeah. Angie, has that kind of affected you? You sit both sides, right? So you've got products coming in from China, you domestically manufacture your products and others. What's your take on this?
I mean, it actually does affect me because a lot of my packaging components come from China. I try to source as much as I can in the US and other countries so that I'm not affected by the situation. But I do feel the effects of it, and I have to raise prices to my customers accordingly based on packaging. But I do try to source all my raw materials as much as I can through the US and other countries.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what are we looking in terms of where you've been raising prices, and people in your category are obviously going to be following suit to a point? In what would you say percentage roughly in your category you've been shifting in price increases?
In my category?
Yeah, so for the products that you've put the prices up to accommodate this, what kind of increase percentage have you finding that you've had to put up in order to, you know, stay competitive, but also see that your competitors have to increase their prices as well? So is it like a 5%, 10% increase?
Yeah, I mean, it's been like, well, on the packaging part of our costs, it's been about 20%.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, so next question. I think I'll direct this one to Steve, because I think we previously spoke about this before. What is the best way to smoothly move manufacturing out of China to reduce some of these effects? I think you said to me, I may be wrong, that you've either attempted it, you're partway through it, or you've selected a section of your products to trial this.
Yeah, so over the years, we've actually sourced from dozens of countries. You know, the US, Canada, Europe, South America. We've really sourced from all over, and it depends basically on where the raw materials are coming from. We try to be as close to the raw materials as we can, and then if we find an effective conduit for manufacturing, we'll source as close as we can. But the reality is the low-cost manufacturing really centralized in China over the last 15 plus years. And so we have then, you know, we've tried to diversify pieces of our portfolio. So we've moved some to Vietnam in the last couple of years. We've moved other pieces to Malaysia, Cambodia. The reality is it's not a binary switch. People make this mistake that goes, oh, well, if China's got tariffs, just switch to Vietnam or just switch to India or switch to whoever. But that's not the way the real world works.
There's switching costs, isn't there? There's time, there's labor, there's so much going on.
Yeah, and by the way, a lot of these other manufacturers don't have nearly the scale, the supply chain, the logistical capabilities, even the basic price. So there's some stuff that we can buy in Taiwan right now and skip the tariff, but Taiwan's 50% higher than China to begin with. And on that particular category, there's only 25% tariffs. So it still has an edge in China. And as it sounds like you're alluding to, there are other components into this pricing and costing basis that we have to factor in. So, you know, we took aggressive measures a few years ago to move certain things that we saw that at greatest risk, and we're glad we did.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Kian, do you have anything to add there? I know you mainly operate within China, but is there anything where you've diversified for some of your retail brands that you work for, like your Asda's and Tesco and people like that?
Yeah, for sure. I think like when you're looking at your own business, one of the most important things to evaluate is the category of product that you're bringing in, because certain categories are affected differently on the tariffs. You know, some, like, for example, backpacks went up from 17 to 42%, whereas other categories aren't as greatly affected. So before you go considering moving countries and whatnot, just check about how greatly you are affected. And what Steve said as well, even if you have been affected by some of the tariffs and your costs have maybe gone up like 10% or 15%, well, it might not be worth the headache to move country just to save 10 or 15%, because then you might not achieve the scale that China offers you or the sort of speed of production time that China offers you. But what I would really suggest is sort of talk to your manufacturers as well, because China are starting to wisen up on this as well, and they know that their costs of goods are now more expensive for American buyers to import. So as a result, they're now working with other countries. So one of my factories has actually set up a production line in Myanmar. So they're going over there, taking their staff over, training all the workers, and they're basically saying as of the beginning of next year, we'll be shipping out of Myanmar, which has got very little duty rate coming into the US. And then we're actually training those local workers to operate like Chinese workers. But you have to have a good relationship with your manufacturer to really ask them these sort of questions. And then the other thing is also consider which country you're importing into, because like, for example, the UK hasn't been affected like the US has, because we're not at a trade war with China. So if you're importing into the UK or Europe or wherever, just always check what is the duty code, talk to your freight forwarder, and also see if there's any way that you can play around the duty code. I mean, you want to obviously operate, as the law says, but there might be some gray areas where you can use a different duty rate to sort of lower your cost of goods.
Be careful, son. Be careful.
Yeah.
Same to you, Angie. Is there anything you'd like to add on this part here?
No, I think they kind of covered it.
Cool. Okay, so slightly twist on this as well. I think Kian, you may have mentioned this, or Steve, can't remember now, but previously when we've had chats, is that negotiating with factories based on the pain of these tariffs. So you've been hit with a tariff. It's going to pretty much make it difficult for you to make a profit, or you can't really raise the price too much. What grounds do you have in terms of negotiating with your factory? Say, look, we've been hit with this tariff. How can we work together on this? Can you eat some of the burden on your side?
Yeah, absolutely. Because like, I always sort of stress the importance of working in a relationship with your manufacturer. What's good for you is what's also good for them. They don't want you to lose orders, because as a result, they're not going to get any orders. So there's going to be times where they have to do you a favor. And likewise, they're not going to be shy of asking you for a favor when the sort of advantages sit with you. So as a result of these increased tariffs, your cost of goods are become like way more expensive. So if they can offer you lower prices to offset this and sort of keep you competitive, like, they're not going to lose any orders. And as a result, you can use the exchange rates. I mean, we did a podcast together a couple of weeks ago where I sort of elaborated on exchange rates, but now it even plays even better in your favor, because it's on the news now that the exchange rate it's been devalued to, the lowest amount in over a decade. So as a result, they're making way more money without actually, doing any more work. So just ask for some of that saving to be passed on to you. So then you can then pass it on to your customer, get more orders, they receive more orders, and then you're working in partnership together.
Yeah, so going back to the whole exchange rate thing, is that where you do a screen grab and show the history of where the dollar to local currency changing, and you can basically chart it and say, look, you're now actually getting 8 to 9% more. Is there a way that
exactly? There's a great website called xe.com, and it allows you to basically chart any graphs, and you can sort of time it the last 3 months, the last 1 year, screenshot it and just show them, and also just send them one of the articles which are all over the news right now, just saying how much they're benefiting, because like China's goods are a lot more expensive now because of the tariffs that Trump's put on, and the government's trying to combat that by saying, okay, well, we're going to devalue our currency so that it's now cheaper to buy Chinese goods. So you're going to benefit if you just sort of show them these things and have a good relationship with them and can have an open discussion.
Yeah, sounds good. Steve, anything you'd like to add here?
Well, I would just say that, first of all, currency is clearly a part of the equation that you have to deal with. But the more volume you do with the supplier, the more likely they are to be proactive in trying to salvage your business. So we have a bunch of products that in May went from that 10% up to the 25%. That was one of the other escalation points. And so that's a pretty significant increase. But we had factories reaching out to us proactively going, hey, we're going to take all of that burden, or we're going to take the majority. In some cases, those factories get rebates from the local governments or the provinces, which are, kind of trickle down tariff, wars, they're distributing this money out. So what I would say is that the more volume you do, the more likely you are to have them be cooperative and to be even proactive in trying to salvage you as a customer. And as Kian mentioned, the people at the biggest scale and the most forward thinking are figuring out how they diversify their own supply chain, whether it's Myanmar or Cambodia or Malaysia, wherever, they're rolling equipment across the border, setting up factories as quick as they possibly can, because they know the United States is an irreplaceable source of business, and they have to take evasive action.
Yeah, sounds good. Angie, I want to bring you in a bit more on this convo on this side, just switching gears back to the US. Now, being a domestic manufacturer, for some of your clients and for you, it's domestic bliss, isn't it? Because you're able to avoid any of these issues, apart from like the packaging. When you're domestically manufacturing, it's generally higher, but there's no real change to you. All what's happened is your competitors' costs have gone up. Do you want to talk about some of the advantages of being domestic as well in terms of manufacturing in your local country?
Yeah, sure. So sourcing domestically, I mean, I find you have more cash flow because you don't have your money tied up for 2 or 3 months, waiting for your goods to get produced and come from overseas. So that's definitely a benefit. And, you can introduce new products and launch new products faster because of the cash flow. It's also nice. It's easier, obviously, to go visit your factory, to go see them, to go, see what's going on and negotiate and talk to them.
Yeah.
And then obviously, if there's many suppliers that you can choose from for a product, you can shop around a little bit easier than I think going to, overseas or to China.
Yeah.
So I'm able to work like with my customers quite a bit on pricing and things like that, because we can always work in different areas. I can look for different raw ingredients that are cheaper, or they can, have a same quality product using some other things, and different packaging options and things like that. So I know, just as a manufacturer, I have a lot of, when I do have something, because I often have ingredients that will raise, prices will raise on, and I can work with my customers with different options. And that's always nice to be able to do in something like this.
Yeah. So similar for me back here in the UK, like I manufacture some products here. It took me a long while to find the manufacturers. They're not like on China when they're ready to go. Over here, it's like they're nonchalant, takes longer to come back to you. There's less of them to go around. We don't necessarily have the scalability, but what I like about it here, you get your disbursements every 2 weeks. By the time you work with a factory, you can agree terms, say like 30 days. So that keeps ahead of cash flow as well. And obviously, like you said, you can go and visit them. And I mean, I do that to go to China anyway, but there are some advantages to being at home and then being away. And it's nice to get a blend between the two. But I definitely feel, for me personally, even though it's better for topical products to be here in the UK and pay a little bit more, the lip service you get for China is second to none. Like for me, I found like I don't know if it's the same in the US. I'm not saying you're a manufacturer, so you're not going to say I take 3 days to get back to people. But the common complaint is in the UK or the US is things like, I had an issue with manufacturing bottles here, for instance. They wanted 60,000. So one little tip I've got for people, if you take generic bottles and you go to the factory, UK, US, and say, can I have your distribution list? And they give you a list of all the same products, and it's got a product code. You choose one of those bottles, for instance. That allows you to go to them and get 500 units or less. So what you do is you negotiate with each one of those different distribution partners. Then that way you'll know that you're always going to be in stock of those bottles, and then you don't have to go overseas to get them. But inherently, you still pay a little bit more. So just switching back to China again, any advantages with government regulations that will benefit the West over, say, the subsidies that the Chinese get? We do know that the Chinese get a lot of subsidies, but is there anything that works in the advantage for people from the West over the Chinese in their own country in terms of regulations? Steve?
Well, I would start with the just safety.
Yes.
The reality is, over the years, people have heard about, Crayola had, kind of poison crayons for a time that were shipped to the United States. And the toy industry, Disney and the like, all got hit with lead paint in their things. So, when you're sourcing in a local place that is a Western place typically, and I think that covers Australia, Canada, US, UK, really all of Europe, where there's rigid compliance standards, I think the safety is enhanced in those countries. And by the way, that's why many Chinese consumers would prefer foreign products, Australian, Canadian, US, including their own baby milk, which was laced with melamine for a time and was a huge scandal. So you have to really think about it from a, regulatory compliance. Sometimes it seems like a burden, but safety and so forth is much, much better in Western countries.
Yeah, makes sense. Kian?
Yeah, absolutely. And just make sure you're working with like reputable QC companies as well to test for these sort of things, because I kind of see like too many Amazon sellers just sort of shipping products over without testing them and then finding out later on that they have faults with them once they get reviews. So just make sure that whatever you are importing, that has been sort of tested to the highest standard. But, within like government regulations, it can work for you and it can work against you as well, because, the government in China is very, very strict on like, controlling its pollution crisis. And, the main energy source in China is coming from like coal production. And as a result, that's why it's so smoggy, because like pollution is measured by the thickness of the particles in the air. And a lot of it is stuff that's coming from the coal plants. And then as a result, they'll just shut factories down, like without any notice. They'll just say, right, guys, pollution's too high, we're shutting it down. And then like, your production is just stopped for like 30 days and there's not much you can do about it. So just always like be in the know, talk to your manufacturers, understand, what's going on in China and what's going on in the government. And even your factory can sort of help guide you sort of navigate through these sort of issues.
Yeah, makes sense. Guys, if you want to ask any questions, just throw them into the chat or the Q&A here. Same again on Facebook. If you want to ask any questions, I'll get round to those shortly once I get through my list I've got here. So happy to answer those. So next question for you. When we're up against Chinese sellers who own their own factories and they take advantage of these said subsidies, other than brand store, like the brand store itself, how do we leverage to get ahead? Because it's weighed in their advantage, whether it's the masterful ways, shall we call it, of their marketing on the platform, quite a lot of them. Mm-hmm. But as you said, there's billions pumped into the government. And if you're buying electronics from a factory in Shenzhen, what chance do you have against the Chinese guy whose family owns it, who's going to be able to manufacture this at a lower price? So obviously, Angie, we should ask you first, being a factory, and then we'll move on to the other guys.
I don't think that I can answer that in regards to the China subsidies.
No, but you can in terms of domestic manufacturing. Well,
yeah.
Look at the advantages. Is like when we're talking about brand story, but if we're talking about products, does anyone who wants to wear topicals on their skin sit on a boat and fry for 8 weeks? That, just things like that. So have you got any suggestions there?
I mean, I will say there are things to look at when sourcing domestically. There's a lot of regulations for cosmetics in particular is not very regulated, but each state does have different regulations and different factories will have different requirements based on where they're located. And just knowing that you're using a factory that's actually properly regulated and regulated to the standards that you want it to be regulated. Because my standards here in Florida are very strict compared to some of the factories on the West Coast, for example. Yeah. I've walked into some of those factories and I'm like shocked. I'm like, wow, you can have a clean room like this in your warehouse with dust and dirt. Like I can't have that. I'm very strictly regulated because I'm also under the drug and devices regulatory, standards here in Florida. And I mean, obviously going to direct to a manufacturer versus using a middleman. I mean, there's a lot of people that are middlemen to factories. So just knowing who you're dealing with so that you're getting the best deal and the best rate and you're getting the highest quality. Yeah,
makes sense. Steve, extended to you as well. When you're going up against the Chinese that own their own factories, take advantage of subsidies, etc., we talk about brand story, but what else is there to leverage with?
Well, the first problem is that I think, a lot of us are very, again, almost binary in our thinking. We're like, well, if somebody sells this, whatever mouse and somebody else sells a mouse cheaper, then they feel like they have to lower the price. And in many ways, I think Amazon is pushing that agenda, right? Because of the buy box and the comparison to competition, much of which I believe is anti-competitive, by the way. And I think that there's going to be more news coming on that in the future. But the reality is play the long-term game. Many of these suppliers are really just playing the short-term game. And by producing a high quality product, by producing a product that stands up or that you provide good support for, that actually can win in the long run. it's hard to articulate that story up front, but what you find is over a year, 2 years, 3 years, you have customers coming back and they return to you because of all those intangibles, but they were noticeable. They just couldn't name what they are. And so when you truly think of a brand, don't forget that playing the long game really is the best strategy. And many, many China suppliers that I know and good friends, they're like, the next 5 years, we're going to make as much money as we can and we're getting the heck out of China. That's their entire strategy. And this is not one or two guys. This is dozens of folks that I know.
Yeah. Ken?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just say that, you know, this is why it's so important to be a product practitioner and a product developer, because like if you are passionate about the products that you're selling and you're passionate about the products you're developing, then you're going to actually develop the best products, because quite often a lot of people are just buying products from China and then selling it online. But like for me and the majority of the products that I've developed, I'm actually using it myself. So if it's a tent, I'm sleeping in it. If it's a backpack, I'm hiking with it. And like, as a result of testing your own product, you will then develop the best product like for your audience. And if you understand your customers and your niche, then you're going to add the most amount of value as possible. And yeah, like Chinese factories can copy your product, but if you're constantly developing, then you're always going to stay ahead of the curve. Like while they've just copied your product, it's been selling for the last 6 months and it's selling well, you've already worked on the next thing. So you're always going to be one step ahead of them if you're a product practitioner and a product developer. The other thing is that, like, you know, you can also get your customers, depending on what your product is, into a subscription model. That way it sort of encourages repeat purchases. And then the other thing is, you know, just be clever about, you know, your packaging. Offer value through your packaging as well. And sometimes you don't always have to get your packaging from the manufacturer who actually makes your product. So then you're also hiding, you know, what sort of advantages you're giving with your packaging. But, you know, for example, if it's a towel, then make the packaging a pouch, which you can sort of store your towel in. So the packaging also suits the purpose, which you can reuse. So just things like that, just try and be clever, stay ahead of the game and sort of outsmart the manufacturers.
Sounds good. Okay, next question. So other than, say, Alibaba, global sources, 1688, where are some other places that people can go to China and source?
Well, they can start by going to China.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's the online version. So yeah, let's talk about China a bit more. Sorry, I should have elaborated on that question a bit clearer. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. But you know, from my perspective, so there's a number of products that we've brought out that we have very large expectations for. I'm talking about multi-million-dollar expectations per item. And we didn't see them at the Canton Fair. We didn't see them on Alibaba. We had to kind of, like Sherlock Holmes, find our way through the countryside to, you know, put all the clues together. And then we found a base of manufacturing and did the normal bake-off. But there's nothing that replaces actually physically going and seeing your existing manufacturer. There's no question other manufacturers in that same area. And just by kind of reaching out and asking questions, you can get introduced to these folks, talk to sourcing agents, trading companies, whatever you have to do. Definitely, you know, try to make sure that you get feet on the ground at some point, because your understanding of the entire supply chain, your product, even your product quality problems, many times you just look at them making it, you know, they're making it by hand or whatever, and you're like, why are you doing it like that? If you just did it like this, it would be faster and reduce all this waste, or we would eliminate this complaint we keep getting. They're like, oh, okay, we'll do it like that. You know, there's just some intangibles you can't put your finger on. So I recommend, as Kian said earlier, go into your manufacturer, developing a relationship and exploring as well. Discover other opportunities by being on the ground.
Yeah. Kian?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been buying from China for 10 years and I've been going to China for 10 years. I can't stress the importance of actually doing your business in China. And I understand, okay, let's say if you're just getting started in your Amazon business, maybe it doesn't make sense to immediately go over to China. But as soon as you have a product that actually is turning a profit, then you definitely have to be in China to sort of get the best manufacturer, get the best price. And for me, like my favorite place to kind of start is the Canton Fair, because, you know, you've got, so, I mean, the Canton Fair is like the size of an international airport. You know, you've got so many different products, so many different suppliers under one roof. And, you know, let's say you're sourcing a backpack, there's 3 halls full of backpacks, you know, and then you can find a factory which really specializes in whether it's you want an outdoor bag, a travel bag, a fashion bag, a suitcase, a military bag, whatever, like they've got them all. So you can basically go down, find your manufacturer, play them off each other. And then, you know, the real value is also in the factories as well. You know, I've found so many products I didn't even know my manufacturer actually produces. When I was walking through the factory, I find out, you know, what other brands that they're supplying. I get offered new products, you know, stuff that they don't take to fairs. And it's like, if you really want the competitive advantages in this business, which nowadays is so crucial, it's not as easy as it was like a few years ago. If you really want those advantages, then you have to absolutely be in China.
Yeah. No, makes sense. Angie?
Yeah, I'll say one thing that I run into a lot is, people coming to me and they want a product that they've seen. So they want to duplicate something else that's out there, and they want it the cheapest possible and the cheapest, manufacturing and cost. And I always try to give them some advice without going too far, but you want to definitely find what's out there and what's selling well, but you need to make it better. You need to make it unique. You need to make it yours. And if that costs a little extra money to have a better product, maybe a little more unique, a little fancier packaging, whatever, you obviously want to work with a supplier that can help you in the long run. Again, thinking about your product as something you're going to, nurture and build customers, and not just throw something out there trying to make money competing with everybody else. Yeah. Especially in my niche, which is highly competitive, you really need to get very niche-y and very custom and more unique. So, I personally tell people, like, when you're going to go with your supplier, make sure that they are going to be somebody you can go with in the long run. They have all the services you need to offer. They have the range of products, so you can launch your second, third, fourth, fifth, 100th product with them, and you can work with them, and you can customize things, and you can, make things better than your competitors and actually build a brand.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen quite often is that people focus so heavily on price, especially with products in China. But what happens is they keep taking away layers and layers of quality. So what you wanted in terms of getting $1 off might seem good, but you end up with a piece of shit at the other end because they've really stripped back on all the key components that made it of any quality. One way I've worked with suppliers before, and maybe you guys at a higher level have done this, is what I call bill of materials. So we break down each product component and we understand the pricing for each component, where to strip it back. We had a product where, where you just kind of, what's the word for it? It's like feature creep. You spent so much on the product and kept adding and adding and adding and adding, and the price was getting out of control. And I sat down with my partner, Luke, on this. I'm like, this is just spiraling. What is going on here? What is the component cost for each of these? What are the parts that actually work and are functional? And inside this product, we had a cover within a cover. This cover cost $1, but it brought no value at all. No one see it. It didn't add to the feel, the texture, or nothing. It was just a cover with inside of a cover that cost $1. We took that away, and that reduces costs like significantly. Then we looked at other parts, like how the zip is constructed. All these different things can make a big difference. So sometimes doing a tear down on your product, working out if you can build that relationship with your factory, have a bill of materials, work out what these components cost, what do they bring to the table? Because in some cases you might extract something away and then add something more premium, and it still be the same unit price, but it's enhanced your product.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just add something to that as well?
Yes.
I like to take it a step further as well. So whenever I'm in a factory, I always make an effort to make one item myself as well. So for example, before I ever went to a Chinese factory, I would just see a backpack on the shelf as one unit. But then when you actually go in the factory and you see it actually being assembled, you see it as like 30 different units rather than one. You see the shoulder straps, the foam that goes in the shoulder straps, the buckles, the pullers, the zippers, the webbing, the coating, the materials, all that stuff. And then if you sit down on each sort of production line and you sort of make it yourself, then you really understand, wow, okay, this is actually the process, and maybe I could make it. I don't have to have this additional foam inside, or I don't have to have this like recycled PET board to add stability. That's not required. And then you can start to save costs just by understanding how your products are made. And then let's say, for example, you've got a $15 item and you want to get it down to a $12 item. You can immediately make those calculations in your head because you've sat on the production line and you understand the process start to finish. So you can just say, okay, I don't need that, that, and that. And if I add this, it'll add a lot of value to the consumer. And the only way you can really educate yourself on that process is by being in the factory.
Yeah. Steve?
Well, I would just say proactively, if you want to torture me, then get me to go make a product. Kian is quite a trooper to get on the line and actually make something. Although I've run some of the equipment, I'll pose for the photos with the factory guys. Man, oh man, I hate being in the factory. But it's necessary. It really is necessary. So I quite agree with the premise. And I love the use of bill of materials, Danny. Very few Amazon sellers know what a bill of materials is, but not only do we know our bill of materials, and we have a teardown for every single item we have. And I mean every detail. If it's a rivet, a magnet, whether it's seen or unseen, every piece, every component, we want to know what it is, and we want to know where it comes from.
Yeah.
So the upstream supply chain, we will always know this manufacturer provided this PU leather or this fabric or this, you know, raw material component, because if we ever need to change, we need to know all of those components and their origin to be able to make a transition. So I love that mentality. And I would also say, you know, be careful of the yes, we can answers you get in China, which is like the most common thing that will happen is you'll ask the Chinese factory to do something. They'll say, yes, yes, we can. Or in Chinese, they say, 可以, 可以. And, you know, that's what the boss says. And then the translator looks over and says, yes, yes, no problem. And that could mean anything from hell to the no to, yeah, no problem. We do that every day. But you have no idea which it is. And so be very careful of that, because they will engineer out whatever quality that you thought was assumed or implied to meet your price. And Angie talked about this earlier. I think I've seen that mistake made over and over. And I really say, be careful of the yes, ask qualifying questions, clarifying questions again and again until you really know every piece of what's happening and why, what it's made of, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, that whole bill of material thing come along by mistake, experimentation. And I applied that to the UK. It was the only way I was able to bring a product to market in the UK is to go the bill of materials route, because when I went to a manufacturer, they just call it, this product is a private label product. For them to put it together, it was £5.20 plus VAT. For me to do it, it was £1.80 once I've sourced all the parts and brought them in. And then what happens, we use the factory as the 3PL. And we sent all the components, and the free issuing part was done by the factory. So you had the raw material, and then we sent all the components into the factory. So I had to go off and source all those elements. But that was the only way I was going to make it work in the UK, because I understood then is that these same people that are offering you as a private label, they're doing it 2 to 3 times higher because they've got to make money themselves. So totally get that. So sometimes good things happen out of a mistake, but then it's always a good for negotiation as well, because you can say, look, here's, like if you do open book with them, you say, look, this is how much I cost to source all these elements myself. It's a pain in the backside. Would you do it for an extra fee? And would you be able to meet me somewhere in the middle? So you start with sourcing externally and then see if your factory can do it, because it's a lot easier for those to manage those moving parts than you. And plus they'd also, in some cases, had better deals with people to get higher scale in terms of each and every component.
Yeah, that's really important. Can I just add one thing as well?
Of course.
It's super important to actually understand the materials that you're using as well. So it's so easy just to say, okay, this outdoor furniture chair is made of polyester, but you want to know like what type of polyester, because within polyester you get 300D, 600D, 900D, and the D stands for denier, which is like the weave and the weft of the fabric. And like, we get the materials in, we look at all different materials, we choose which ones we like, and then we actually get like a magnifying glass with a little needle of 1 square inch, and that's how you measure the denier, and you twist the needle along to count the amount of weaves and wefts in that material. And then, like, you know, the price of 300D is way cheaper than 900D. So if you're just saying, okay, cool, it's a polyester chair, you don't actually understand it. But if you ask, like, what is the material within that polyester, and then that's just polyester, you've got nylon, you've got cordura. And then within cordura, you know, for military purposes, we've done like infrared reduction in our fabric. So like there's so many different levels to it. So just because it's written somewhere polyester, you have to inquire about that and dig deeper to get the real benefits.